Quite often, old graphics cards like this GTX 760 are written off as e-waste. But despite these claims, can this GPU play some sort of modern games? Well, I guess we're going to find out by the end of today's video. So let's see how it gets on. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to see what this graphics card can still do pretty well. The GTX 760 is built on the Kepler architecture, and to be honest, this isn't really a good starting point because it's not Nvidia's best by any means, and it doesn't even have DirectX 12 feature level support. So if we wanted to enable FSR today, that's not going to happen because it will just cause problems. And Nvidia dropped game ready driver support for these GPUs around 4 years ago now, so any game made within the past sort of 4 or 5 years, it's not really going to be performing well if it starts, and that if is a massive if with these GPUs. And even then, this thing's got 2 GB of VRAM, so we'd be running into issues even if the games could start anyways. But the age-old question is, how does this graphics card get on? And to find out, we've tested it out at 1080p in our Ryzen 5 7600 testing PC. By the way, the rest of the specs will be linked in the description with my Amazon affiliate links. I do make a small kickback from these, and it does really help out the channel if you buy anything through them. Anyways, we've used the latest Nvidia security driver, I think it is, I can't remember it, so it'll just be down there. And the 760 is set to its out of the box settings. So let's see how it gets on. Jumping straight into a game with some modern relevance, Fortnite is, well, on the performance API, it's not hard to run at all. We're getting more than 260 FPS on average, and the 1% lows are also looking pretty good, especially by Fortnite standards, so I don't think you're going to be having any problems in this game. Yes, admittedly, the Ryzen 5 7600 is certainly pulling its weight here, but even if you pair the GTX 760 with a relatively competent processor like a 4th gen i5 or 4th gen i7, I still think you're going to be getting very good performance here, so not too bad at all. But flipping that on its head in Cyberpunk 2077, where we had to set everything to the manual lowest settings, yeah, the game didn't really look that good, and it didn't perform that well either. You're set for a Hollywood standard 24 frames per second, and the 1% low really wasn't that far behind it in all fairness. But yeah, it's not playable by any stretch of the imagination. Don't get a GTX 760 to play Cyberpunk. I don't recommend it. Where you can make a case for this graphics card is Minecraft. Even on the newest 1.21.4 update, you're still going to be getting really good performance if you install the sodium mod, because we're getting just south of 700 frames per second and a very good 1% low as well. On a 12 chunk render distance with fancy settings, I'd say this is absolutely playable performance. And yeah, your frame rate will start to drop as you start to build farms and all that sort of stuff, and depending even which biome you're in. But to be honest, this is a very good starting point for Minecraft, and I don't think you're going to be having any problems in this game. Skyrim Special Edition on the high preset was a bit of a weird one, I'd like to say. We got an average frame rate of 60 FPS, but we were seeing quite a few drops below that, especially when there's quite a lot of particle effects on screen, because there was like a dragon in the benchmark and he kept shouting flames at us, and that was tanking the frame rate. But for the most part, what I'd probably do is put it onto the medium preset, and that should clean up those 1% lows pretty nicely. That's what I'd do here. If not, probably get a faster graphics card. Counter-Strike 2's performance is looking pretty nice. You're set for a high refresh rate experience at 1080p. Admittedly, this game is a bit of a, well, it's a CPU hog, let's be honest. But if you had a relatively decent CPU made in the past decade, you should still be good to go, and it shouldn't really be holding back the GTX 760 that much. If you wanted a budget CS2 gaming machine, yeah, the 760 is not that bad at it. Next up is GTA 5. The original launch for this was in 2013, the same year as the 760, and performance on the high preset here is really good. 60 frames per second on average with a relatively decent 1% low as well, is meaning that the game's looking pretty decent and it's performing pretty well too. The biggest issue I had with this is we had to lower the texture settings down to high from very high, and this doesn't look that great. Thank you 2 GB of VRAM, you really helped out here. And then there's The Witcher 3. This was a 2015 launch, but it got enhanced a few years back, so that made it quite a bit harder to run. But on the low preset, we're not really seeing brilliant performance. 41 FPS on average with an okay 1% low. Yeah, it's not the greatest performance in the world, and it would have been better before it got sort of enhanced, so that's a bit of a shame for GTX 760 owners out there. Is it playable though? Yeah, I'd say it is, especially if you're playing controller, but other than that, I'd recommend a slightly more powerful graphics card for this game. So starting off with the worst of it, if you wanted to play any new game on a GTX 760, you're not going to be having a decent time. If it starts, which is a miracle in of itself, games like Cyberpunk are just not going to run that well. We set it to the manually lowest settings we could at 1080p today, and it still didn't even crack 30 FPS, which, I don't care who you ask, is not really playable, is it? And Cyberpunk is like the best case scenario for modern AAA games, as most of them just won't even start and they'll just give you an error message when you try to open them. So yeah, for newer AAA games, I guess you could say the GTX 760 is e-waste. And what especially hurts is if you needed more performance, you can't use FSR because that's a DirectX 12 feature, and this doesn't support DX12 at a feature level, so that's not going to work either. But this graphics card isn't fully e-waste, as it can still play some pretty good games. If we look at, well, Minecraft with the sodium mod, I recommend every single Minecraft Java player to enable this because it's just free performance, literally. We were getting an absolute crazy amount of FPS here. Yes, I know the Ryzen 5 7600 is definitely pulling its weight and making the GTX 760 look a bit better than if this was paired with like a 4th gen i7 or something like that. But even then, if you had a CPU like that, I think you'd still be getting pretty decent performance in Minecraft, and this is like one of the best games ever made, and this graphics card can play it just fine, even on fancy graphics, so that's a huge win there. And older graphics cards like this are naturally going to be fine for esports games, like Counter-Strike 2, which admittedly is a bit more of a CPU demanding title, but the 760 did a pretty decent job here, and like I said, if you've got like a 4th gen i7 or something like that, this GPU is going to get on pretty well. And then when we go over to the old games like GTA 5, of course the 760 is going to be putting up a decent job. So is this graphics card totally waste? No, it can still play some games pretty decently, but if you wanted a GPU which will play virtually every single modern AAA game, I reckon you should check out this video up there. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.